Hey everybody, Andrew Scott here, the host of Herer'S Victory Garden. I just wanted to take a minute and talk to you about the upcoming episode you're about to watch. You'll notice, probably, that we're a little short on cannabis specifics in this episode. Well, a big part of that reason is because when we started this podcast back in January, we had no idea where the world would head. No, seriously, none of us could have predicted this. But Mark, Chris, and I felt that we really needed to talk about these things before we could move on and talk about things that we all find fun and entertaining or informative about cannabis. We felt that it was our responsibility as human beings to talk about these issues because they're affecting us all, from the pandemic and coronavirus to Black Lives Matter and the state of the environment and the world. These are real topics that everybody should be addressing. So this episode runs a little long, and we decided to save the Story Time with Mark segment for the next episode coming up in November. We've got a lot of stuff to work on as far as this country goes, and we're encouraging you to do your part. Stand up for the people you care about. Take care of each other. Really, everything about this year can be summed up in 4 simple statements. Black Lives Matter. Wear a mask. Keep washing your hands. And vote. From everybody at the Herer'S Victory Garden podcast, thanks for waiting for the next episode. Thanks for joining us. And enjoy the show. It's a lot, but we're all going through a lot. Be good to each other. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Herer'S Victory Garden, the cannabis-centric show with a little something for everyone. Herer'S Victory Garden is brought to you by PodSquadPDX.com, painless podcasting. By the Narrowband Broadcast Network, NBBN, the focus is on you. And by the support of our listeners and subscribers through Patreon. Patreon, create on your own terms. On this episode, Chris says it's not easy being green. Andrew finally admits to his past as a Brad. And Mark compares the greatest astronomical event in U.S. history to a well-lit Wal-Mart parking lot? Man, these guys are on fire today. No, seriously, we were all on fire. Here's your host, Andrew Scott.
Hello and welcome back to Herer'S Victory Garden featuring Mark Herer. I'm Andrew Scott, along with my co-host, Chris Vacano, and of course, the man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway, Mark Herer. Mark, how you doing?
I'm fabulous. How you guys doing?
I'm doing fair to partly not on fire. And Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
So, has anything happened worth talking about since we last got together and chatted?
Gee, let me think.
I can't think of any.
Right? Yeah, well, good. Hey, thanks a lot for joining, everybody.
Yeah.
First off, thanks to everybody who tuned in and watched our premiere episode. What was it? January? February?
January-ish.
Wow. Yeah. It seems like forever ago. We really appreciate it. We got a very warm welcome. We got people listening all over the country and in a few places around the world. And to all of you who tuned in and kind of wondered what happened, well, you pretty much know what happened. But some shit went down and it suddenly became kind of impossible to do what we wanted to do. But I think we're coming out of the ashes. Literally, we'll talk about that soon. We did, and this is something that when Chris and I were talking this morning, he kind of wanted to touch back on. We did record a second episode.
Yeah, we did. And it went pretty sideways pretty fast. A lot of that was on me.
Well, it was on all of us.
I think we all went a part of that.
The way I would describe it is, at least for my part in it, and the way I remember it is, the conversation would get going, and suddenly, the conversation would take off in my own head, and I'd be carrying on the conversation, and yet my mouth would not be going, and then by the time I could construct the thought to answer the question, the conversation had already moved on completely somewhere else, and
there were sometimes, Chris, and your video visualization of this helps. You did turn a little bit green. So full disclosure to our listening audience, we all decided that since we're cannabis and hemp professionals, we'd loosen up a little bit and have some fun. And we all partook of what we thought was going to be just some nice, relaxing CBD. And it didn't work out that way. We were all staring at each other like, do I know you?
All I know is I was sitting there grinning stupidly for about an hour.
Yeah, so we promise that at least two of us aren't doing that this show. But let's talk about the elephant in the room here. And part of me kind of wants to refer to this as the Herer'S Victory Garden Rona Reboot show. Obviously, towards the end of February, the coronavirus pandemic knocked on all our doors. And Chris and I, again, full disclosure, Chris and I share a household. Chris is my partner's former partner. But we all live in this bubble and support each other kind of as a multi-household. And but also, full disclosure, Chris and I are both immunocompromised and deal with a number of things. I have a disability that I will talk about more in a future show. But I broke my neck when I was 15 years old, and I suffer from paralysis. And part of the paralysis is that my lungs, the lower portion of my lungs are partially paralyzed. So I get a pneumonia shot every year without a pandemic. And Chris has a number of issues that
which I'll be glad to dive into as well. As appropriate, in context. I will punctuate right now and say. It's been sort of interesting for me. I'm an HIV positive hemophiliac, and one of the strange things that I've observed, and it's strange that nobody's talking about it, is in my community, and I've been keeping my finger to the pulse of it, and I'm well networked in the hemophilia HIV community. I know of one person who had coronavirus. And survived. It got through it.
I'm glad to hear it.
And so I've sort of pondered and wondered, why is that so low?
Well, and I think a lot of it has to do with where I was going with this, and that is Chris and I have been in pretty damn strict lockdown since March. I loosely remember my lockdown entry point date was like March 11th.
Actually, you were the 11th. I was the 13th.
Yeah, and we've been pretty strict about that. We have been reducing our exposure as much as possible. The good news is Chris and I are both digital content creators, and so our businesses are based in our homes. So my commute is say hi to the cat as I grab my coffee and go into my studio in the morning, and Chris is similar, but we've done traffic is terrible coming past the bathroom. Man, it's just a bottleneck. But we both felt, both for our own health and safety and for the betterment of the world, that we should observe lockdown really strictly.
Well, and also for those concentric rings of people around us, like my mom, for example, yes. She's in her 80s and living in in a senior citizens apartment building. So, not wanting to become the vector path for that.
Right. Because of course, as we all know, really coronavirus first blew up in Seattle in in care homes,
Yeah.
unfortunately, of all places. Now, Mark, you have not had the benefit of strict lockdown. You've been living your life as safely as you can, but you're still going to work every day, and
Yeah, I
how are things for you right now with all this?
well, ever since just before this all began, I started working on a recreational cannabis farm in Sandy, Oregon, and all told, there's about 40 employees that work full time out there. Um, I mostly build and maintain greenhouses. Uh, so it's been an adventure. I can safely say I have washed my hands more times in the last 6 months than I have in my entire life put together.
Can you see over my shoulder? Can you see my hand sanitizer up against my? I think I used to have a Stimpy behind it, but my hand sanitizer is damn close, and I found my brand, and I'm sticking with it. It smells like lemongrass. It's lovely.
There you go.
But everybody at the farm doing okay? You guys haven't had any reported cases or anything like that?
No, actually, right after this started, we had the owner, a friend of his, and one of our employees. They all went and did this snow trip where they were taking snowmobiles out somewhere not too far away, a couple-hour drive. And one of the three came down with cold, flu symptoms, was feeling crappy, cut his trip short, went to the hospital, got tested, and came up negative. But for about 3 or 4 days, like everybody on the farm, well, he actually didn't come back to work until he was cleared, or until his friend was cleared.
But it was a nervous week and some after that. Hey.
Yeah, actually, my niece, my oldest brother's daughter, mysteriously came down with coronavirus. I found out about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she didn't tell anybody until after she had it. Confined herself for a couple 3 weeks, got through it, and then was retested to be COVID free. She didn't even tell her parents. I mean, she obviously didn't go out anywhere and expose herself, but when she found out, she just was in lockdown. And so that's the closest to home, which is pretty damn close to home. Granted, it's 1,000 miles away,
but still.
So yeah.
I
thought I was going to make it through this whole thing without knowing anybody, but
no, that's
feel privileged.
That's just what I was going to say. I don't think now. I guess that better than 50% of the population knows somebody who's been directly affected. I think we probably crossed the 50% threshold a while ago. I've lost 2 acquaintances of mine. An EMT friend of mine out in New York that I went to college with back in Wisconsin passed from coronavirus, and a ER nurse friend of mine down in Los Angeles passed away early on in the pandemic. Both of them before the 15th of April, I believe.
I'd go a step farther and say that probably every single person in the country now is at least is 2 degrees of separation from someone who has passed from this.
I would agree. If not 2, maybe 3, but it's got to be
3 at the most.
It's got to be up there. And just for everybody that's listening and everybody that's watching, we please take this seriously. There is so much disinformation that's going on right now, and really all anybody is asking is that you wear a mask out in public. It protects you, but it protects the public more, because the one thing we learned very early on is that you can feel perfectly 100% fine and have this and be spreading it, and it might not be you, but it might be somebody else. And so show kindness. Come on, we're about kindness.
Yeah, it's community mindedness, and honestly, be careful. We love you. We care about you.
Exactly. And
think about how sensitive it is. I mean, in the middle of it, I'd say a couple of months back, we would hear that, things are dying down, the amount of daily cases is going down. And then just randomly, we hear about some frat party in some part of the country.
Yep.
And not mysteriously, massive cases go on the rise in that local community.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, and, we find out from video, from word of mouth, from whatever, that, just about everybody at that event was not wearing a mask.
Right? I mean, all I got to do is say one word and you're both going to cringe. Sturgis.
Oh.
that was the money shot I was looking for as far as reaction goes. Yeah, it was just really, come on, seriously. But you can't be surprised.
Well, and what hurts about that is I've felt a real connection to Sturgis for a long time, actually, ever since I was a teenager. Because not because I'm so much into motorcycle culture or any of that. Although I've steadily, I'm a guy. I mean, motorcycles are cool, right? It's not so much that, it's that as an artist, I came to be working with, I was being mentored by an artist who every year would go out to Sturgis and was very high profile as an artist at Sturgis. It was one of his big, business engagements of the year. He would normally sell out all of his stuff, and so I got really interested and fascinated in Sturgis, and came to recognize it as this really kind of special event, and to see, I understand how it's very hard for regular Sturgis participants to accept the idea of Sturgis not happening in a given year. But the other side of it is it seems very short-sighted to me, and
the other side of it for me is that Burning Man shut down this year.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
yeah, that's right.
I mean, I don't want I don't want to point the finger at anybody, and I don't want to get too politically shrill about this.
Right.
We just need to take care of each other, and we just need to do it. I'm sorry. I've got friends, so many friends in the medical field. They wear N95 every single day, all their shift, can't take it off. I can breathe just fine through a fucking napkin,
Well,
if I do so knowing that I'm trying to support the public health, I'm down with that.
Yeah, not just Burning Man, but the music festivals as well.
It's been live music all year.
It has been devastating. Although I'm really interested in this new, the new thing that a lot of artists have been doing, and that is doing concerts in old drive-in movie theaters. I love drive-in movie theaters, and that's pretty safe social distancing. You are literally in your own bubble.
It's a fascinating mashup.
Yeah,
because for a whole generation of music listeners, drive-in movie theaters are meaningless, right?
Yep.
I mean,
right. Drive-in.
And yet all of us,
that's where you get your fries handed to you, right? Oh, it's a drive-through. I'm sorry.
That's a drive-through, right? I mean, I'm sure we've all got drive-in movie theater stories from being kids, and even college. For us, it was like that fun thing to do, go to the drive-in, because it was so quaint and it was dying.
Yep. And now I don't even know. Well, actually, there used to be one on Powell, right, Mark? Wasn't there one where you're driving like what 100th and Powell or something?
Years ago, 103rd.
Sorry, we're getting really local on you guys.
Yeah, the sign is still there. It's right next to that carnival company.
Yeah, the carnival company. The place. There's a Okay, we're again too local. Tell you what, let's go to a break. We'll be right back. This is the Herer'S Victory Garden podcast with Mark Herer on the Narrowband Broadcast Network. We'll be right back. And we're back. This is the Herer'S Victory Garden podcast with Mark Herer. I'm Andrew Scott, along with my co-presenter, Chris Vacano. Chris, I want to take one real quick minute and mention something before we move on in our next segment. And that is, I need to reintroduce you because you were once known as Chris Ritter.
Yeah, I was
why
thinking about this morning.
Yeah, why was the change? Why did you decide to go with your God-given name?
Yeah. So when we first kicked this off back in January, I was feeling a bit nervous about the effect that my presence on a cannabis-focused podcast might have for some of my clients. I run a creative services agency, and information being as free-flowing as it is on the internet, it would be very easy for someone to, connect the dots. And so I wanted to be mindful of that and sort of protect my clients. But as I got into it and started thinking seriously about it, I realized I wasn't doing any favors to either my clients or the industry by trying to obscure that. And in fact, it still wouldn't have been that hard to connect the dots and say, hey, wait a minute, Chris Ritter is Chris Vacano. Why does he feel the need to cover this up? And it speaks badly of sort of both sides of the equation that I was trying to protect.
Well, you just got to the point where you realized that anybody connecting, that the dots being connected don't matter.
Well, yeah, exactly. And why would I not lean into this and take ownership? And because I am an advocate for cannabis, and it's part of who I am. This podcast is part of who I am. My connection to you guys is part of who I am. So why on earth would I not? Why would I not take ownership of that?
Well, good, and welcome, Chris Vacano. It's nice to have you on board.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, Mark, let's talk a little bit about, well, I was going to say the rest of it all, but I think it's probably better said as the unrest of it all. Coronavirus is not the only thing that's been going down, and not the only reason why we all decided to kind of step back from our podcast and let the dust settle. We've got the Black Lives Matter protests. We've got protests in general for a lot of different things. How are you doing with the state of the world right now?
I have the USA Today app on my phone. I don't, newspapers aren't as readily available as they used to be. Personally, it's just too much.
I feel you.
Just about every morning, I flip on USA Today. I skim it. It's all crazy. It's all psycho. Normally in the past, before this all started, or since we as a people suddenly decided we were going to pay attention,
right,
and not do what I normally do. Granted, I have a different perspective. I have kind of 2.5 black siblings. I say a half because one of them is mulatto, and honestly, you couldn't tell, regardless of how much sun she's gotten,
right,
that she has any black in her. But
it's fair to say that you come from a racially diverse family.
Very, very open on many different levels. It's been a crazy time. I normally, don't like to get involved in politics. Before all of this started, the only part of the newspaper that I would ever pay attention to really was the sports section, because you get enough sex, you get enough violence, you get enough corruption, you get it all in sports, and now I turn it on. I mean, it's always been everywhere, but now it's more prevalent than anything, than everything. It's a crazy time in our lives. I mean, This happened the last time 102 years ago. So nobody, almost nobody on the planet remembers this.
Right. You mean you're speaking of
Like a pandemic.
you're speaking of Spanish influenza. Yeah.
Yes.
And you're right. It was almost 100 years even. 1917, 1919, right after the war, was the second big Spanish influenza outbreak.
In 1965, I believe, was the Voting Rights Act, which was the year I was born. So I'm 55. It's just a crazy time. Also, with that perspective, I've watched my siblings have issues throughout their lives since they were babies. I was 12 when the first of them came into the world. Racial inequality is probably never going to go away. What this time, it's kind of my opinion that racism has been re-legalized in the last 4 years. It's pretty horrible. For the first time in my life, and I don't know that both of you or either of you have been out enough to really experience this in such quantity recently, the American flag. Where I work, I take about a 30-minute drive into the back hills, kind of Sandy, Oregon. And I would say that there's a lot of people driving trucks and SUVs that have big American flags and other flags flying from the back of their vessels that don't make me proud to be an American. Or I'm proud to be an American. It's just the flag has such different meaning these days.
Yeah, the flag has been co-opted into, a divisive symbol. We all used to literally be able to rally around that flag and go, that flag stands for something that we all believe in. And now I'm like you, and you're right. I have not been out. I've been in lockdown, but I do go out. I do a lot of Craigslisting. I do a lot of safe porch pickups of things here and there just to keep going. But I haven't been to a grocery store since February. But yeah, I see it, and I don't. I think it's fair to say that we try to be apolitical on this show, but at the same time, we can't be apolitical. I don't think there's room for being apolitical in American life anymore.
Right.
And I know that I speak for all three of us here on Herer'S Victory Garden podcast when I say very loudly that Black lives matter. They do matter. And all three of us have people in our lives who have been directly affected by racism. And, we're not going to be so strident as to say, if you're a racist, don't listen to us.
Actually, no. Well, I would argue, please do listen to us because maybe we can have a conversation, and maybe you're a racist by training and upbringing, and you've never really given it much thought.
Yeah.
And you always, every single day that you wake up, you have an opportunity to change the trajectory of your life.
Exactly. And the big part of that for me is just, well put, Chris. I think the thing that I want people to come away from in this little segment of our show is, we're accepting. We understand that people are different. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different life experiences. But I'm a believer in trying to do better every day. And I'm not going to say that if you're a racist, fix yourself, but educate yourself and try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I think, Mark, what you said earlier is really spot on, and that is, it's suddenly in the last 3 or 4 years, it's suddenly become really okay to hate again. And I don't want that in my world. And I don't think either of us three want that in our world.
Well, and if
it just winds up being a simple thing of, is that being better every day? Is waking up in the morning and looking at a person because of this, that, or the other difference and going, you're less than me. And just take the time to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. That's one of the most powerful things that anybody can do to change the trajectory of their life, is realize that, like it or not, we're all connected. We're all connected in this weird web of life. And if one string gets tugged, we all get tugged. We learned that with coronavirus. We learned that with the Black Lives Matter protests. And, now...
And
with
the anti-protests.
Exactly.
And the anti-protests, yeah. If I could interject just a few thoughts here, and I'm full on with you, Andrew, on a number of the things you just said. For me, the last 6 months has been very much about opening my eyes and ears and listening and learning and growing. And recognizing and really coming to terms with racist things I've done in the past, racism that I've participated in my own past, and being okay with that, recognizing that it was in my past, and not like extreme stuff. I've never waved a Nazi flag or anything of that nature, but just recognizing that being in a white environment, somebody tells a racist joke. Yeah. And not speaking up and saying something, that's on me. And so I'm taking ownership and accountability for that now by changing my own behavior going forward and learning from this collective experience that we've had the last 6 months, and recognizing that, yes, absolutely, Black Lives Matter. And it's not just there's been a lot of argument over just the wording of that a lot of people interpret Black Lives Matter to mean Black Lives Matter more. And that's not it. That's not it. It's, yes, Black Lives Matter too. And in fact, if you look at human history, Black lives are essential to where we are today.
Well, yeah, in a way that makes many, many people very uncomfortable, because it makes you have to reconcile so many different nations' histories with exploitation. And I think the thing that you are bumping up against, Chris, is the same thing that I have, is the same thing that all white people have, and that is a silent consignment of racism, and the idea of systemic racism being part of our daily lives. And people not speaking up, it's that silent complicity,
Right. And so leaning into it again and just looking into myself, and I think you're doing this too, and I think a lot of people are doing this, and I applaud them for it, looking into themselves and saying, what, I'm not going to participate in this anymore. And that one change, okay, one person doing that, not a big deal. Okay, that affects their orbit. But then when thousands and then millions of people pick that up and start doing it.
And again, everybody's orbits cross. So one orbit changes and yeah. So
well, on that note, racially speaking, my girlfriend some months back was doing some self-therapy, and she came across a saying, everybody's living in their own movie. And Chris, when you made reference to, a lot of these, probably most of these tendencies are taught, they're learned. They're brought up this way. Like,
nobody's born a racist.
Well, nobody's born a Packers fan. They're taught that. You were raised that way.
True that.
Yeah. So it's all about perspective and, walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. And Chris, when you were talking about, being in a big crowd of white people or Caucasians or whatever, and, some black guy or black person walks by and somebody says something insensitive, and, it's up to you to say something or react. And if not, maybe at the moment, pull that person aside later and say, what the fuck was that?
That was
not
that
cool.
Really
wasn't, that wasn't cool. Yeah.
I was really, my ex-father-in-law, who unfortunately passed a couple of years ago, he, for his like just before he was a teenager through his like high school years, grew up in North Portland back in the day when it was not very racially diverse. That's where we, and I wasn't here then, but we as Oregonians, that's where we decided we were going to put all the black people was in North Portland.
Yeah, Vanport.
And so he had to walk to school, and most of the time he tried to avoid confrontation, so he'd walk on the other side of the street. But, you know, he told me many stories of, you know, getting into fistfights with, you know, the black kids to and from school and, you know, everyday life. I would say he, when I first met him, he was a proud, not maybe proud and strong, but he was pretty damn racist. He would say some pretty fucking insensitive shit. And, you know, his daughter, my then wife, sometimes would have to explain why Mark got quiet and kind of took an aside, went outside and had a cigarette and came back and, you know, pretty much expressed my opinion about what the hell's going on and tried to, you know, invoke some clarity into this man who was in his mid-60s at the time. And, you know, I like to think that I had an impact on him, at least, if nothing else, when he was around me.
Yeah, and, you know, that approach, this idea that, you know, we are all bubbles and that our bubbles and our orbits cross, I think that's probably the most empowering thing to keep in mind, is that, no, you're right, you can't change people. You can't directly change them. Chris and I had a discussion the other day about social media, and both Chris and I have stepped way back on that. Mark, you're not big on social media in the first place, so good on you. But this idea that, have you ever changed anybody's mind on social media? The answer is almost categorically no. Everybody has their own preconceptions and they're on their own team, and it's not a place for discourse. What is a place for discourse and a place where you really can affect people is one at a time, quietly, reasonably, and often just saying, you know, what you said, I don't know why you feel that way, but that really made me feel uncomfortable. It was not cool, and just, I don't want you doing that kind of thing around me. That right there is often enough to make a person look at their own behavior, because if they're your friend, they value something in you. And if something they do makes you uncomfortable, even if they've done or said something not directed at you, it makes them step back and go, wow, do you think that about me? And then that self-critical gear starts turning in your head. And I really think that those small changes, those small, instead of this idea of cancel culture and calling somebody out, yes, there's times where that's really appropriate, but really where I think most of the traction happens in social change is one at a time, just one person saying to another person, that I found that made me really uncomfortable. And at times leaving it at that, because that person's going to walk away from that exchange and think about what they did in a way that does not happen on Facebook, does not happen on Twitter.
If I could chime in, that with social media, you know, call out culture has become the cudgel with which we beat each other over the heads. And the thing is that when you get on the receiving end of that, you don't have that opening up like you just described, Andrew, where it's person to person, and the person receiving the message is open to internalize it and think about it and come back. You know, when call out culture is all about public humiliation, and it's about it's the great pissing contest of,
well, and quite frankly, it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work as a mechanism.
Put on your psychological and emotional.
Yeah, Mark, what were you going to say?
It's like a bad management technique. You know, when you decide to call out an employee in front of other employees, they never go, "Oh wow, you're right." I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. And if they say something like that, they'll never mean it.
Exactly.
But if you take them aside and sit them down and say, hey, you remember when you did that? And you remember what you said? And, and then they get all self-reflective. And if they don't go, yeah, I remember, that they don't get it or they didn't get it. And that's the kind of person that you're not going to break through to.
I totally agree with that.
So I was going to say a minute ago, so I think the movie is called Green Book with Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah.
So I watched that. We watched that either early this year or late last year on, DVR'd it. And until that moment in my life, I believe the Green Book was in reference to this little green book. It was like a travel guide for Black people.
Exactly right.
Telling them where it was
safe and how to survive going through a certain town.
Exactly. So it was maybe not necessarily a wake up call, but it was like the shit that you don't think about. I think that we've all probably watched a movie in our lives that may not have had any racial essence about it. It was just sometimes you see something and maybe it's a romance movie and maybe it's about how to treat your spouse or how to not treat your spouse. And, you see something and you're like, maybe you've never done that before, or maybe you did once. And you're like, and it just had an impact on you. And you're like, wow, that's fucked up. And I remember the time I did that. Oh my God, I swore I'll never do that again.
Right. I'm still embarrassed from back then.
Well, we've all done shit that, I mean, God, I can't say that I've ever really had a racist moment from myself to another human. Growing up in my father's world, which is a Jewish world, we've had enough abuse. I mean, most land races have had enough abuse throughout time. Every walk of life, every religion, every creed, every country. We've all experienced racism, whether it's, I mean, God, think about the last time you actually went to a party, very long time ago, but think of the last time you went to a party. Okay, Andy, I don't know who your football team is, Chris, but you went to a party and you're like a Packer fan and like 95% of the people are like, fuck you. Now, granted, most of them were joking, but some of them are like, I really hate that guy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And it's just simple shit. So I like to think, and I really like to hope that through our conversations, hopefully, if we enlighten one person or have a moment where we come from a perspective of teaching, hopefully, and maybe it's not a teaching moment, but it ended up being a teaching moment for somebody where they had that aha moment.
Yeah.
So are we going to be able to change anybody? You're probably right in that, the odds are against it, but I like to think and hope and pray that.
And if it's not a teaching moment, at least maybe make it be an okay space to have learning moments.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I don't know everything. I mean, briefly about me and my background, I grew up just north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a very rural area. The only ethnic people that I ever grew up with as kids or playmates or schoolmates were Filipinos, because that was the largest diaspora of ethnic people in my area. My high school had, I believe, two people of color in it. And, I really was first exposed to different ethnicities when I got more into adulthood and was going into Milwaukee, Wisconsin proper, as an employee working in factories, where I really got my diversity.
Chops.
Yeah, I got my diversity chops by working alongside Black people and Hispanic people in factories. And then, my later on, when I was a professional sound engineer for live music and a club DJ, I got a lot more diversity that way. Hip hop was just coming up, and I was able to dip into that world, not as a performer or a DJ, because my hip hop skills suck. But I'm the whitest hip hop dude there is. But then
I think that was Vanilla Ice.
yeah, well, you know what? He's got more credential than me. I'll be fair. But then, when I was a cook, when I was a line cook in truck stops and restaurants in my later teens and 20s, working alongside my Hispanic brothers and sisters in the service industry, for me, racism wasn't present because I did have a lot of exposure, but it was a gift that I didn't realize was happening at the time. I didn't realize that my upbringing was much different than other people's as a kid in a rural area who purposefully went out and was looking for other cultural experiences and was looking for other people so that my bubble of experience wasn't so monotone. And I feel that that's something that really did benefit me as I moved forward in my life. And now that racism is kind of fashionable again, it's really,
Sorry.
it's not, that's okay. That is so the right time to have a, because that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling, and at the same time, it's hard to know how to be an advocate right now for people who are going through this in a much more present and significant way than I am. And I just want to wrap this portion of the show up by saying that, the three of us understand that we are in a place of racial privilege and that we want our offering to be something for all people. If you enjoy this, if you enjoy the conversation, we want you to know that you're welcome here. And we do say Black Lives Matter. And we do recognize that we're all going through a real mess of a time right now. And we're going to try to figure out a way to just be a voice of calm and fun and education. And we will be discussing it further as we move forward with the podcast by trying to bring in other voices. You're looking right now at three white guys who realize that we're three white guys, and we want to own and acknowledge that and say, we're going to take our own medicine and we're going to try to be better, even though we're not bad, but everybody can use some improvement here. And,
if I could just chime in and punctuate this with two thoughts. Number one, in along terms, what you guys were talking about with teachable moments and teaching and persuading, the perspective I come to this with is this is conversation. This is about conversation. Let's keep the dialogue open. Let's keep it rolling, and recognize that we can learn from you guys too. We can learn from our audience, and we're open to that. I think all three of us are very open to learning and listening, and that gets to my second point, which one friend really encapsulated for me how best as a white person with privilege to be an ally, and that is listen, learn, respect, and refuse to turn a blind eye.
Chris, what's your experience? I mean, you grew up in Colorado.
Yeah.
And you got some time in the Southwest, and, talk about your experiences.
Yeah. So my experience was, I look back at and I spent, I was listening to you guys and thinking about this quite a bit. My experience of race is a little bit different than yours, but not terribly. I grew up in Colorado, primarily on the west side of Denver, which at that time was predominantly Latino. So I had lots of brown friends. And as a kid, I did not care. I mean, I cared if my friends were nice to me, if they were just friends, if they were fun to hang out with. I did not care anything about what color they were. There was always this low level awareness that that Black people and Latino people had sort of different ways of interacting in the world than I did. But we all found ways to kind of enjoy each other, right, as people. But sort of superimposed over the top of that was a sort of quiet, racial, you're white and you stick to white people kind of thing, both in my own household and in my schooling. I went to a private Catholic school. Uh, Again, a lot of Latino kids were there. Very, very few black children, and they were not typically very successful there because those schools were built around white culture and white behavior and white practices, and particularly the black kids had a hard time fitting in. And they weren't getting a lot of support from the teachers, which was really, I look back on that and I feel bad about that.
Did you feel bothered by that as you were witnessing it? Was there
I
something
did.
in the back of your mind that said, this doesn't feel right?
I did and I didn't. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, there were two sides to that coin, and one of those sides was that taught behavior. That taught you're white, you behave like a white person, and this is how people are supposed to behave. Which was, why do they keep acting out? Why? And I had to constantly fight against that because deep inside of my heart and in my soul, I felt a profound empathy for these kids who were having a hard time, and yeah, it hurt me, it upset me, it made me really mad, and when those kids stopped coming back to school, there was sort of a helplessness and sort of a what can I do, and then I think about moving outside of schooling. I mean, I was my first two houses that I really remember were in deeply Latino neighborhoods, right on the edge, right on the city limit, on the west edge of Denver. Then we moved to Edgewater, and so Denver people know what I'm talking about. Edgewater is kind of north of Lakewood. Little bedroom community, lived in a big apartment complex, friends of all colors. But again, there was this layer of, my brother was comfortable with, saying racist things. I don't think they were really thinking about it. I don't think it was malicious. I think it was conditioned behavior. And my dad, I watched, he struggled with both his racism and homophobia throughout his entire life. I think internally he knew it was wrong, but he could never get around treating people who were different from him differently. And that manifested sometimes with my friends, where he would treat my friends differently, and rather than standing up for them. This is one of those things that I regret, and that I alluded to earlier. I regret that I did not stand up for them more forcefully, that I did not take on my dad and say, wait a minute, these are good kids just like the good kids that you like, and so that's one of those things that I've really looked into myself to change and stand up to. Yeah, and so I just want to sort of wrap it up, and this ties it actually back to cannabis in an interesting way. When I got to high school, which was it's the Jesuit high school in Denver, predominantly white and Latino kids, a very privileged environment. This is where all the rich kids, they went to one of two schools in Denver. They either went to Cherry Creek, the public school for rich kids, or they went to Regis, which was the high-level education rich kid school. And, again, Jesuit, so there was a strong sort of religious underpinning to everything. I think I remember a grand total of 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 black students in my class throughout the 4 years that I went through Regis. And freshman year, there was one black student who I had never said 2 words to. He and I, we passed each other in the halls. We knew each other. We were aware of each other. And I was actually sort of afraid of him for no good reason. for no good reason. And one day, the buddy that I rode to school with, we got together with him and one other guy, and we went out and we all smoked up together. And I realized that I had absolutely no reason to be afraid of this guy, and he and I like totally took a liking to each other. And it's just I was intimidated because he was kind of quiet, he was kind of tough. He had broken a guy's nose early, but the guy had it coming. No, I mean the guy was in his face with all sorts of racist crap, and if I were him, I would have hauled off and knocked him. But sharing a joint with somebody.
Yeah, no, sharing a joint with somebody, I think we'll all agree, is like one of the greatest equalizers and normalizers there is.
Or sharing a meal, or just spending time with somebody.
True, but I don't know if you noticed, Chris, but we're a weed-centric podcast, so
yes,
I tied that together really nice for you. Yeah. Well, and I think we all, I mean, Mark, you've got experiences like that. I've got experiences like that where you're smoking with somebody that you didn't know, and literally 10 minutes later, you have found so much common ground. And it doesn't necessarily even need to be about cannabis. Cannabis is like the inroad. And then because you're being there and you're being open with somebody and you're sharing something, then all of a sudden, all these connection points start. And you can look at that person and they can be from a different part of the planet, completely different culture, and you're like, oh, you're a human being just like I am, and we have things that we can affiliate with and commonalities, and we can share things, and all the rest of the bullshit like magically falls away.
Falls away, yeah. It's like alcohol. It's a social lubricant.
Yeah, except for this one doesn't kill you.
Right.
Good point.
Yeah, so.
When I was a kid,
my
folks divorced when I was 2. My mom actually dated this really awesome black guy for a little while. And one of my first memories of him in my life, I don't know what he did for a living, and I probably went to sleep early. I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. He comes over one night. Mom tells me the next morning, that Rennie was there and he's already come and gone. And she tells me how when he parked his car in the back parking lot. We lived in an apartment building, and she said that when he was walking up to the building through the parking lot, that he got jumped by 6 Mexicans, black guy. But the really the saving grace here is that he was like a 5th degree black belt or something like that. So she told me the story of how he whooped on all these guys. So like my first, I already had black friends at that time. I grew up in Los Angeles. But like my first real adult experience was like that of a hero. I mean, Rennie was like a superhero to me, and I thought he was cool as shit. And he was really nice to all the 3 of us. So we liked him a lot. I went to high school at Hollywood High, and
that was pretty diverse.
It was very diverse. There were over 3,000 kids in my school. There were kids from, I believe, my recollection tells me, 103 countries, 33 languages, something like that. But the Caucasian was almost in the lowest percentile of that whole. Most of my friends were black. I hung out in the theater group mostly, but most of the people that I ran with, as it were black. So I have a very unique perspective. I've almost been arrested a number of times just being with one particular black friend specifically. We were walking through the streets of Hollywood one night, and these 2 cops are driving by, and they decide they're going to fuck with us. So they pull us over. I mean, we're in high school. I don't even think we were carrying ID yet. I don't think we had to technically.
And if it wasn't a legit ID in the first place.
Right, it was like a high school ID or something like that.
Well, or in my case, it was fake. And my name was Brad.
That's awesome. So yeah, we're sitting in front of this apartment building that's got this little brick planter ledge in front of it, and so the cops are talking to us, and my buddy he was very aware of racial profiling at the time before it was even a phrase. I'm sure this was like 1981, 2, 3, might have just been created. So he was just going on about, why you got to keep a brother down, why you fucking with us? We're just, it's because I'm black, right? And I'm like, oh my God, shut the fuck up. We are both going to go to jail if you don't just shut up. We're not carrying anything. We don't have any weapons. We don't have any drugs. Just shut up. Let these guys do their thing, and they're gonna leave. They got nothing. It wasn't a big deal, but it was definitely a moment of racial profiling. And they just decided they wanted to fuck with us. And if my friend had had his way, he probably would have went to jail that night.
Yeah. Well, because he knew he was in the right, and I unfortunately I got a story like that as well. I was dating a person of color in my early 20s, and we were driving to a club, and we got pulled over because I literally had a taillight out, and they saw that my girlfriend was black, and suddenly she's out of the car, and I'm allowed to stay in the car, and they essentially, to cut a really ugly long story short, they said to me, look, she's either going to go to jail because she's a prostitute, and I'm like, wait, what? Well, there's only one reason why a white guy is going to be driving into this part of Milwaukee, with a black girl in the car, and that's because she's a prostitute. And so it was flat out racial profiling. Fortunately, nobody went to jail because she was able to show a picture that we had in the car of us together at a party. It was a Polaroid. It was a flappy Polaroid.
Right.
But it was a picture of us together. So apparently she wasn't a prostitute. She was, in fact, she literally had to prove she was my girlfriend in order to not be arrested.
Wow.
And so, yeah, the ugliness is something that I think we're all hyper aware of right now. And I do think that it's something that forces three white guys like us to look back on our life and go, There were times where I benefited from my whiteness simply because of my whiteness. And it makes you think, and it makes you look out at the world now. And if anything, at least I have a greater awareness of the privilege that I have had through my life simply because of the color of my skin. And that privilege insists that if I have it, somebody else doesn't. And that's really where we are all with this right now. And that's what everybody here at Herer'S Victory Garden Podcasts wants people just stop and think about it. Just stop. What will it hurt to stop and think about it for a minute? Even if you don't think you benefit from privilege, just think. Because right now, the world needs more people thinking and a lot less people that are knee-jerk reacting. And we'll come back in just a minute. We're going to talk about us being on fire right when we come back. This is the Herer'S Victory Garden Podcast with Mark Herer. I'm Andrew Scott. That's Chris Vicano. And we will be right back. Hey, welcome back to the Herer'S Victory Garden Podcast featuring Mark Herer. I'm Andrew Scott. That is my buddy Chris Vicano. And we'd like to thank especially the music for our episode, our theme music, and our closing credits, and all our bumper music is done by Ron Kajawa. Good former music partner of mine back in Wisconsin, and he's a great musician, commercial music for all your needs. You can always go out and find him at ronkajawamusic.com. However, if you're a listener and you've got music that you would like to hear featured on the podcast, or if you're an artist, a visual artist, or if you just got something that you think we should see and maybe wanted included in the podcast, just get a hold of us here at the podcast, contributions at hvgpodcast.com. And, if we like it, we'll reach back out to you and figure out a way to use it in one of our upcoming podcasts. So, yeah, one of the interesting things that's happened since we left you last is we were all on fire.
The entire West Coast.
Yeah, and, to all our compatriots here on the left coast, we still got a lot of problems. There's still a lot of fire that's happening. But it happened here in a way in the Pacific Northwest that has not happened in memory. I've lived here since 1999, and we had a fire a couple of years ago. I believe it was 2017. Chris and I and Mark live in an area of the Pacific Northwest that's often referred to as the mouth of the Columbia River Gorge. And it's a beautiful, pristine chunk of the Columbia River, and it's surrounded by nice high hills and woods, and it's bucolic and wild and beautiful. And it lit on fire due to an idiot kid throwing a firework down into a wooded area. That's as close as the fires ever got in my lifetime here.
Yeah,
and that was
about years ago.
That was a couple of years ago, and I think the closest it ever got to us was about 25 miles east of us. But
Yeah,
this series of fires that have happened here in 2020, the only thing we're missing is plague, rats, and locusts, because everything seems to have gone sideways for us here. We suffered some of the most significant fire damage Oregon's ever known. Per annum, I should say, Oregon suffers about 500,000 acres worth of wildfire damage a year. It's much often very south of us, closer to the California border, but it's not insignificant. This year, we burned 800,000 acres of, a lot of it was populated areas. We burned 800,000 acres in 2 days. We got hit by a 2-day windstorm with winds upwards of 60 miles an hour. It was an absolute blast. And I don't mean that in a good way. It was just jet winds, and a number of small fires, which were very normal looking back when they began, suddenly were blown up into a conflagration the likes of which we've never seen here in the Pacific Northwest. And the smoke, well, to get you all up to speed, Mark and Chris and I all live within 20 miles of each other. And the evacuation notices, we have a 3-tier system. We have a ready, set, go system, where yellow warning is you should be ready. You should have something packed, know where your cat carriers are, have a bug out bag. Set means you should be ready to go at a moment's notice. Literally, that bag should probably be in your car. And then the red flag zones are go zones. You're supposed to be out. And if you're staying behind, you're doing so against best advice. I've never in my time here had any evacuation warnings within 50 miles of where we live. This time, Mark, when I was living with you, if I would have been living with you then, I would have been in a ready, set place. Chris and I I've since moved. Chris and I now live pretty close to each other, and we're about 10, 15 miles away from Mark at most. The warning, the evacuation zones were literally just across the freeway from where Chris and I live. They never got to us, but we were all generally ready anyhow. Mark, you were living in an area that did have preparation warnings in place.
In a yellow zone.
Yeah.
We didn't actually make it to the yellow zone.
It was just over the hill, right?
Well, it was literally blocks from us was the yellow zone. So it's green, yellow, red, ready, set, go.
Yep.
So the red zone was at the Clackamas River, which is 8 minutes from me on back roads. So
Right.
it's probably 3 miles as the crow flies.
Yeah.
It's directly south of here.
Oh, okay.
Damascus is more
Yeah. Put it this way, you could have thrown a stone into the yellow zone.
Well, where I work on my farm, it's a 40-acre farm. We're in the city of Sandy, or just outside of the city of Sandy, but still in Sandy proper. Our farm was in the red zone since the smoke arrived. I worked over a week in the red zone every day. Most days it was so smoky, we all had to wear our masks working outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was really, really thick. And I think Andy's going to show you guys a clip of my backyard during that. I was actually doing a short video of my plants in the backyard, but also it was an awesome illustration. You couldn't see 100 yards. You literally couldn't see the trees at the back of our property, which is probably 200 feet from where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
The smoke was that thick.
Yeah, people don't understand, if you haven't been in it, what it was like to be in this smoke. This smoke was, I mean, we're already inside because of the pandemic. We're already wearing masks. The smoke was, I literally could not see the trees on the lot of my neighbor across the street, which were maybe 100 feet away. It was literally like you could walk out and just hang a picture on the smoke. It was so thick. It was seeping in. When I went out into my shop to get something, I could see tendrils of smoke seeping in underneath my garage door. Everything smelt like the worst campfire. You know,
Yeah.
it was like the campfire where people were throwing in full bottles of booze and old paper plates. And the thing that really struck me about it was I was keenly aware that this was not just forest fire that I was smelling. There's definitely a different odor, taste. And it struck me, I'm smelling people's houses and people's lives.
Smelling plaster and roofing materials and plastic, television boxes and whatever else. Yeah, for sure.
We were literally covered for it. I mean, it was a solid week of being socked in with this smoke.
And we were blanketed under it. Yeah, it wasn't like a foggy morning where you go out and you can't see things, but it's gonna burn off. This was constant and consistent, and that's what's really grinding about the whole thing. Or what was grinding about it for me was, you just look out the window or you step outside and the smell is there. The blanket of smoke is there. Andrew, I know you, like me, you got into, checking the AFI periodically through the day. I'm sorry, not the AFI, the AQI, Air Quality Index. And to really hit home the point for people who don't know exactly how bad it got here. On the AQI scale, 1 to 50 is considered healthy, 1 to 100 is considered acceptable, and then it gets steadily worse from there. We peaked in my checking at over 450.
Yeah, we had for a time, we had the worst air quality in the world.
Yeah.
The thing that really struck for me was one of the gadgets that I got to give myself some peace of mind through the pandemic is a blood oxygen. I have a little sport watch that does a blood oxygen reading on me. And every morning I would check my blood oxygen level, and it was normally 99, 98 maybe. That entire week of being in the smoke, even though we had the house buttoned up, the windows were closed, we were running fans in the house and all this, my my blood oxygen was regularly 96, the lowest it has ever read, and it was that way consistently for a week. Even though we have good filtration on our HVAC system here, it was awful, and it was unhealthy. It was unhealthy to be out in my own backyard. My own backyard, where I've got my cannabis plants going this year. I couldn't go out and visit them for a week because every time I went outside, it was literally like it felt like I was breathing in sand. I had some place that I had to go, and I didn't bother with my Corona mask. I went out with my ANSI 9001 rated respirator that I have with my welding kit because it was the only way I could breathe without feeling like I was getting punched in the lungs. Yeah. And God, Mark, I don't even know how you guys handled it having to be outside so much. Literally, your smoke was twice as bad as ours, and ours was horrific. So how you came out of it, still being able to breathe at all is a miracle in my mind.
I got an N95 mask, and it was more for, I was told it was good for the smoke, which was great for the smoke. I didn't smell it or taste it or anything, but it wasn't really good for coronavirus.
No.
So, but that's kind of how I got through it. The first couple of days were not nearly as thick as the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh day, whatever. So the first couple of days, I wore it for a little bit every day. I'm like, this is, we take it off and smoke a cigarette or whatever.
Treat your lungs.
Exactly. This isn't that bad. But as the days went on, it was just so tough.
Well, it was mentally and emotionally draining too, because it wasn't like fog. It wasn't like smoke. You went out and it was this weird green, gray, beige weirdness, and it was
like a horror flick.
It really was. I cannot reinforce enough to our listeners and our viewers that it was. We have a slogan: "Keep Portland weird." Well, this was weird Portland on a different level. It felt alien. It felt like a horror movie, and it made the struggle that much harder because now I can't even go out in my own damn backyard without being exposed to something deadly. And don't get me wrong, this wasn't just smoke. As Chris and I were saying, this was plastic burning, carpet burning, all these things. We in Oregon, we lost entire towns.
Yeah, the town of Phoenix.
Phoenix is gone. Phoenix is gone.
Completely devastated. Just gone.
Detroit, out by Detroit Lake, which is a gorgeous community, a beautiful area at Detroit Lake. That's gone. I want to say a special hello and wave of support to all the people that work down at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. Brighton Bush Hot Springs is a magical area in Oregon. It is on the Brighton Bush River. It is an absolutely beautiful oasis of calm people. It's been a bastion of the alternative community here in the Pacific Northwest for years. And I have many good experiences of having gone and stayed at Brighton Bush. And half of Brighton Bush is gone. Fortunately, they were able to save the large hall and a number of the infrastructure buildings, but all the rental cabins were burnt to the ground. A number of the facilities by the natural hot tubs, they're gone. And the people of Brighton Bush are wonderful folks, and we here at Herer'S Victory Garden hope that you guys are doing okay. You will rebuild. You will be phoenixes. You will come back better than before. But love and support from the Herer'S Victory Garden crew. And that love and support extends to everybody who's been impacted by our fires. I'll put a link in our show description below, and there's going to be a link here on the video where you can go to donate money, because right now money is what people need. We've still got thousands of people displaced because of these fires. And with everything going on right now, we know that it's a kind of a big ask to throw your support somewhere else. But if you got an extra $5, pitch it in, because this has been devastating. We've lost over 1 million acres of beautiful forest in Oregon, and in that forest were people's lives and people's homes and people's livelihoods, and they're displaced now. So help if you can. It's been a pretty freewheeling, wide-ranging discussion today between the three of us. I'm personally grateful for it, because one of the things that all three of us agree on is that we never wanted to be a podcast just about being stoners. We wanted it to be a podcast about three guys who have cannabis included in their lives, but we talk about real shit here, and we've all been going through some real shit, and this winter is going to be pretty gnarly, folks. So one of the things I want to know from you two, again, I said earlier in the show, there's been a couple parts of coronavirus and the lockdown and this culture that we find ourselves in now that I actually find redeeming, encouraging, at times, I dare say, fun. What do y'all got? I guess I'm asking, what's been your favorite part of coronavirus life for the last 6 months, Chris?
Well, for me, I mean, yeah, and I'm with you. I see some silver linings in this. But in terms of what's been fun for me, I mean, I've done what a lot of people have done. I've turned to Netflix and Hulu and such as my refuge. And much as I hate to say it, we were talking earlier about The Voice.
That's Mark's favorite thing.
Yeah, and I spent the early part of the pandemic, watching the rest of The Masked Singer, which somehow I got hooked on. I had never watched it before.
Seriously?
But I really enjoyed it. But no, it's going to get even worse.
Okay.
And
I believe you,
because I hate to say it, but I love the phenomena of the Tiger King. I think it was absolutely hilarious.
Chris, my opinion of you just plummeted.
Well, now hear me out for a second.
Okay.
What I'm fascinated about is, as an observer of culture, I'm completely fascinated that this horrible, horrible, horrible show about horrible, horrible, horrible people captivated an entire nation for weeks, and it should never have even gotten on the air. I mean, this was something that was pulled off of the shelf because they said, hey, we've got a captive audience. This is a chance for us to get this property out of the way, and it became an overnight phenomena. And I think that's hilarious as a student of culture.
Well, I mean, people can't help but look at car accidents and train wrecks too.
Right.
So,
right.
Mark, what do you got? What has been the bright spot in this for you?
Where we live, we kind of live in a park. It's a pretty lush place.
I'll put up some video that I've got, Mark, of last summer and the beauty that we all were able to share together, you and I.
It's an amazing place. It's a beautiful place. It's very peaceful. The deer come into our backyard. They feed off our apple trees. We've got tons of birds, squirrels, possums. They all come to feed here. So we sit on the back patio and just are fascinated just watching life. But the first week or two, maybe the first few weeks a month,
mm-hmm.
Our property sides right up to a pretty major street in my neighborhood, and there's always cars racing up and down this hill, and it was fabulously quiet. Traffic was down to nothing. Like the city over, probably the nation over.
Yeah, it was disturbing it was disturbing for a while, and then you suddenly realized, wow, this is kind of cool.
It was nice.
It was so quiet.
I found out like the whole planet was cleaner for that couple weeks or a month because people weren't driving. I mean, I thought that was an awesome
side
effect.
Benefit,
the cause and the effect. So we got the cause, but that nobody was driving, mostly except Amazon.
Right.
And for the fire, so the first night of the smoke, when it really got close to the farm. So that day and for like 2 or 3 days, all I was doing was riding a tractor at work, knocking down brush and small bushes and small, not trees, but
Trying to clear a fire break.
Exactly. So I ended up like clearing most of all the stuff, except what's on this super steep hillside. Um, but just before I was leaving, it was hard to say if it was dusk. I know it wasn't. It was only about 5 o'clock, but the smoke was so thick, it was just super eerie. So if any of you had the privilege or the blessing to see the eclipse that happened 3 years ago and actually be in the totality zone, it was totally awesome. It was totally wild. It was like being in a Gene Roddenberry movie, slash being in a Walmart parking lot at night with all the lights on. It was just really weird. That's what comes to mind. Well, the tops of the evergreens on the property and on my whole drive home that night, it was like the eclipse was just shining on this belt, and the trees were blue as opposed to green. It was so amazing. So those are my two kind of top takeaways from all this insanity.
Yeah,
Andy?
mine is similar, but definitely not Tiger King. One of the things that, everybody at the beginning of the pandemic was just like, well, we're locked down. I'm going to learn how to make bread, or I'm going to learn a language, or this or that or the other thing. As I said earlier in the podcast, Chris and I are content creators. I'm a voiceover artist and a visual medium person. Chris is a web designer and a graphic artist. And, we've been moving towards a different way of communicating with people ever since the interwebs became a thing. And I was a web designer way back in the day, late 95, 96, 97. I owned a company in Milwaukee doing websites before anybody knew what the hell they were. But, my focus has really been my voice and voice work. I do a lot of work. I do work for a couple channels on YouTube, doing voiceovers for sports documentaries. But the change that happened for me is the offerings of content that are available now are, frankly, they're amazing. And they are so much better than anything you could find on broadcast television or cable or satellite or what have you. And it's been so freeing to enjoy different media from different people with different points of view in a production quality that is as good or better than most things that you can find on broadcast television. And that's one of the things that we always wanted to offer when we came up with the Herer'S Victory Garden podcast, is we wanted you to see us. We wanted to be a multimedia stream where you could get us in an audio format, you could get us in a video format, you could see us and affiliate with the people and the personalities behind the voices that you're hearing. And we were moving towards that, and then the pandemic hit, and the three of us couldn't be together. We always had video in mind. We were working towards that. But now, because of the pandemic, we've got it. Chris is down the street from me, Mark is down the road from me, and you're seeing all of us, because one of the things that I decided to do was to bump up my video editing skills and really learn how to do video production as well. But the things that brought me the most joy are things like I've become a huge fan of watching wood turning videos. There are a number of providers on YouTube that will show you, they will go from a gnarled up log of X, Y, or Z type wood and put it in a lathe, and you get to watch them remove everything that's not the thing they want at the end and come out with some beautiful piece of wooden art. It is so relaxing to me, and it's something that my girlfriend will come in and say, "Are we watching wood turning videos tonight?" And I find that both hilarious and endearing because it is so relaxing to both of us. And there's been other things. I'm a big fan and follower
Before
of
you go on,
yeah.
some people would liken that to the Tiger King.
Oh, screw you.
However, I'm not one of those people, but
Okay.
people are like, show me some TV, and it's like watching, glue dry. I don't know.
The worst that happens on a wood turning video is somebody loses a tool and you fear because it comes shooting off at 3,000 RPM. And there's always there's the tension. Is he going to lose it? Is he going to lose his rasp? Is he? I'm a big.
Is he going to go to jail to see it's a Tiger King thing?
So one of the
open your mind.
One of the other things that I'm really a fan of is I'm a fan of Adam Savage, who used to be on MythBusters, and he runs a content authorship down in San Francisco called Tested. And one of the things that I found most compelling is back when we were first all locked down, Tested was a big crew of people. There were 4 or 5 people in the Tested offices at any time. There were 2 or 3 cameras going, professional video camera shots, multi-cameras, and all this business. And then suddenly, everything locked down. And everything about Tested went virtual. And it wound up being just Adam in his shop with an iPhone. And he was going through it too. And watching people going through it helped me not feel quite so alone in this weird alien landscape of this pandemic.
I think you're onto something really, really good here, and this is one of the things I've observed as well. Is there is a phenomena that's emerging where we're reconnecting with ourselves as people and with our own sense of, yes, I have something of value to bring to the world. I have something of value to contribute. And it's not because I'm famous. It's not because some executive decided to give me a TV show. It's I'm a person with a voice and ideas and thoughts, and that in itself is enough value to bring across to the world, and there's a lot of that emerging, and a lot of people really just reconnecting with their presence in the world. And on Adam Savage, what I think you and I are probably of like minds on this, because I was getting hooked into him as well. It was probably the most poignant moment of this year for me, when he did the show right after Grant Imahara passed.
Yeah,
and
just to be clear to the listening audience, Grant Imahara was one of the build team members on MythBusters. And something that a lot of people don't know about Adam and that whole crew is that both Adam and Grant and Tori Beleche all worked at Industrial Light and Magic, and they all worked on the episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars together, among other things. They were very close, and they were very close as friends well before MythBusters, and they were very close after MythBusters run ended. And of course, very sadly, I believe about 6 weeks ago now, Grant Imahara suddenly passed away very unexpectedly from a brain aneurysm. And yeah, I feel you when you're talking about him talking about Grant on camera in lockdown, because we all are suffering from this weird distance. A lot of us who take the pandemic seriously are in lockdown still to this day, 6 months and some days later. And we're trying to do what's right for ourselves, our families, and we're trying to do what's right for the community. And that means abiding by lockdown procedures.
And it
so
makes it hard to have a good cry together and hug something out when it happens.
Yeah, because, I mean, shit, Mark and I have talked about this. I've seen Mark. He's come to my house a couple times in order to drop things off or pick things up. And we can't do what we normally do. We can't walk up to each other and give each other a big-ass bear hug and say, love you, brother, And it's hard. It's weird. It feels alien to this day, even though we're now very well practiced in it. But I do like to look at this. We've all found other ways to connect with each other. I mean, How many different video apps have any of us used for video calls here in the last number of months? I mean, we're all getting to be experts on that. It's because of this pandemic that you and Mark and I, or you and Chris and I guess depends upon which screen I'm looking at. We're connected right now. We're actually able to do the thing that we wanted to do before the pandemic, but we're actually able to do it now because of the pandemic, because new technology has come online where we're able to be recorded in a quality high definition that we feel is something that's worth watching, and you can hear us and you can see us, and it's happening primarily because of this pandemic. And I gotta come out with something good from this, because it sure as the hell isn't everything else that's been happening.
Well, and I think
one person who's probably benefited most from COVID, Howie Mandel. He loved it.
Yeah.
No touching. Awesome.
Right?
Awesome.
He was right all along. Yep.
Here's a COVID hug.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andrew, I think you captured sort of, and you got right up to it, the overall, positive that I take away from this is, just this whole show, we've talked about how we are living at the inflection point where a whole lot of very long storylines have met their confluence in this year. And a whole lot of things have gone really wild and crazy. But along with all of the bad things that we tend to focus on and we're inundated with on a daily basis, and we open a newspaper and it's all crazy and it's all hell, and but there is another takeaway from it, which is this is just a transitional period. This is a turning point in our world and in our lives, and we are changing and adapting and growing, and there are good things coming out of this. There are good changes coming out of this, and that's my big positive, optimistic takeaway from this is humans are funny. We adapt.
Yeah, and it just makes me go back to that old trope, and it's an old trope for a reason, because it actually says something. The end of the world to a caterpillar is the beginning of a butterfly.
That's right.
And so,
that's right.
Well, I think we've said about what we need to say here. We've somehow run well over our time, but you guys deserved everything from us, because we got some catching up to do. But anything anybody wants to close with?
Yeah, just a very simple quip. Hindsight is 20/20, and 20/20 is hindsight.
Yeah, exactly. We're getting through it somehow. Mark?
Be excellent to each other.
Oh, have you seen it yet? Have you seen the new movie?
No, I haven't.
I haven't either, but I'm looking forward to it, because it's definitely the tonic that we need for these times.
Right.
Listen, everybody, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Thanks so much for waiting on us. We know it's been forever, but we're going to be doing this on the regular, and this is our Don't Call It a Comeback special. And, for everybody out in the world today, do your best, be kind to each other, support each other, try to understand each other, put yourself in each other's shoes, and join us again next time on the Herer'S Victory Garden podcast with that guy Mark Herrer and that guy Chris Vicano. I'm this guy Andrew Scott, and we will be back in a month, we promise. Until then, everybody take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Herer'S Victory Garden, cultivating freedom since 1973. Herer'S Victory Garden is a narrow-band broadcast network production. In conjunction with PodSquadPDX.com, Andrew Scott, executive producer, Chris Vicano, associate producer. Website design and maintenance, VCS Creative, Chris Vicano, webmaster. Video editing and production by Andrew Scott. Music courtesy of Ron Kajawa Music, online at ronkajawamusic.com. Make sure to follow us on social media and on the web at hvgpodcast.com. And don't forget to like, click, and subscribe. On behalf of the boys, I'm Heather Chamberlain. Thanks for listening.
NBBN.
The Narrowband Broadcast Network.
The focus is on you.